Hello, everybody, and welcome. Uh, we're very happy that you were able to join us today on our OSDFCon webinar series. We really appreciate you being here, and we hope you're going to get valuable information from today's webinar. This webinar is being recorded, and we'll be emailing out the link tomorrow to everyone who registered. So if you find it useful and informative, please feel free to share it with anyone who you think might be interested. Before we get started, let me introduce myself. I'm Allie Duveen. I'm the event manager at Basis Technology, and I'm just going to go briefly through some logistics before we get to the actual content. Now, you probably already noticed, but everyone is muted. If you have questions anytime during the presentation, please feel free to ask them throughout, but most likely they will be addressed towards the end or the Q&A portion. To submit a question, just type it into the questions pane of the control panel. If during the webinar you close out the control panel, you should be able to find it again by either clicking the orange arrow to expand the control panel, or at the top of the screen, find the GoToMeeting toolbar, and under Window, you should be able to click to add back the control panel. Now, there are also 3 handouts that you can download at any time throughout the webinar about CipherTech, and one specifically for ACE, which you'll be hearing a bit about during the webinar. We did schedule the webinar for 45 minutes. After a very brief introduction from me, there will be a 20-minute presentation and demo, followed by a Q&A session. And when the webinar ends, you'll be directed to a survey. We would really love it and appreciate it if you could spend just 2 minutes letting us know your opinion. It does really help us learn what you thought of this webinar and also what we should do on future webinars. Now, as mentioned before, I work for Basis Technology. We've been around for 25 years, and our cyber forensics team focuses on building easy-to-use software for the people who are on the front lines of cyber investigations. We built Autopsy, which is one of the most popular open source digital forensics tools in existence. And we also make a tool for incident response called Cyber Triage, which is hyper-focused on intrusion-related investigations and automates as much of the process as possible. So without further ado, let's get started. I want to introduce you to Dan Dash, who will be spending the next 45 minutes with you to talk about targeted automation for malware analysis, and he's going to be joined by Rob Honer for the Q&A session. Dan and Rob have both worked in information security in both government and industry. They are intrusions and malware reverse engineers. And a fun fact about Dan and Rob is they've known each other since middle school. So Dan, why don't you take it away?
Thank you, Allie. Like Allie said, my name is Dan Dash. I've been a reverse engineer with CipherTech for about 10 years. And today we're going to be talking about targeted automation for malware analysis. Now, before we jump into the targeted automation itself, first we need to understand why we even conduct malware analysis. And typically we're trying to answer strategic questions like, is this a new variant of something I've seen before? And these questions are really required for understanding and tracking tactics, techniques, and procedures, or TTPs, for the malware or the threat actor behind that malware. And these questions, like, is there new C2 infrastructure, can really help with the collection of indicators of compromise, or IOCs, which are necessary for organizations to defend their networks. So now that we know why we conduct malware analysis, what does that process actually look like? Well, traditionally, a reverse engineer will manually run scripts that they've collected over the course of time in order to triage a sample. They'll then start to reverse engineer that sample, and during the course of that reverse engineering, they'll probably build additional scripts as they need in order to account for any changes that they're seeing in the malware or for new malware that they're observing. They'll then produce a threat intelligence product, which will provide defenders with the indicators of compromise or answer the strategic questions that we talked about. So what happens when we take this process and we put it through the course of an entire organization? Well, across an entire team of reverse engineers, we start to realize there are really no synergies between each reverse engineer, and there's no easy way for them to collaborate. All the domain knowledge that is acquired by an individual reverse engineer resides solely with them. So the solution to this is to take that manual process and start to automate it. So when we take that process and we start to automate it, now all the reverse engineers are contributing those scripts that they've been developing on their own into a framework where team members can leverage what is created across the organization. So if another reverse engineer has analyzed a malware family, what they produce during that process can help me when I inevitably see that malware family later on. Now, the first step in an automation framework is to use signatures to automatically identify malware. And based on those identifications, we can start to marshal the malware to the targeted modules, which are created by the reverse engineers. And there are a couple of options and variety of methods that we can use to signature on malware. Yara is a binary signature engine, which has really become the de facto open source solution in the industry. And Yara signatures allow for granular control and fidelity. There's also proprietary antivirus signatures, which can be leveraged, but should really be considered a black box. You're not really sure what's being used to make an identification, and that can be problematic for false positives or false negatives. And certainly a combined approach of Yara and antivirus can also make sense. So focusing in on Yara, the question becomes, where do these signatures actually come from? There are open source options with collections of rules available. Awesome Yara has a listing of some of those sources. And there are proprietary options as well. But in both cases, you as an organization should really test the rule sets against known malware and known good files in order to understand the limitations of the rules that you're looking at. You can also always build your own rule sets, but keeping in mind that this can be time consuming and expensive. So the best bet is to really combine sources, collect the signatures from open source and proprietary sources, and test them so that you can have confidence in them. And for anything that falls through the cracks, write them in-house. So now that we've identified the malware, we can start to use the integrated and targeted scripts from the entire reverse engineering team in order to automatically extract information from malware that we know about. This will include pulling out the indicators of compromise like domains, file paths, as well as layers of embedded components. So thinking like an implant from a dropper, or maybe like a downloader from a carrier file. Now, what do the scriptable modules actually consist of? Well, we need to keep in mind that we need a framework for managing and organizing the integrated scripts by malware family. Each module, then on their own, will leverage open source and proprietary libraries, possibly Yara, possibly disassembler, and then consist of component modules for supporting the varying droppers, installers, and implants which are associated to that malware family. So if we take a look at an example of this, we can see on the left we have a couple of different modules organized by malware family. We also have a module tied to a threat actor. Sometimes the lines between malware families can be blurred, or maybe a component like a dropper can be leveraged for any number of different types of implants. So in that case, maybe we'll organize by threat actor. Diving into the Chinoxy module itself, we can see that we import a couple of different common Python libraries, including construct for structures, or maybe regex or Yara for binary byte patterns. We additionally leverage IDA as a disassembler, and specifically their IDA Python scripting language, in order to extract targeted information from within the context of that disassembler. Finally, we support multiple components, such as different PE dropper components and different PE implant components, or even configuration blobs of different sizes, which may mean that there's some information in one that's not in another based on the size. We'll be using this Chinoxy example throughout the remainder of the slides, so keep that in mind. So why do we actually need supporting libraries? Well, malware comes in a variety of shapes and forms. It could be a 32-bit PE attacking Windows, a 64-bit ELF attacking Linux, a PowerShell script, or a PDF or a Word document with an embedded binary. And each of these malware types presents different challenges and requires different approaches in order to parse and pull out the information that we're looking for. The goal is that we want the automation framework to scale to any type of file type that we see. So we can use the supporting libraries to adapt to challenges of the different file types without rebuilding the framework, and with access to functionality through common interfaces. Now, there are a variety of open source libraries which exist to assist in parsing information from varying file types and architectures. for defining and parsing structures that you're seeing, or for decrypting information that you're trying to access. Now, even with these open source libraries, the question becomes how to handle and organize things like new algorithms for Cypher algorithms that aren't handled by PyCryptodome, or to handle file types which may not have library support you need, maybe like .NET compiled binaries. And you can build and maintain these libraries yourself, or you can seek out some commercial solutions. So as we discussed before, we need a framework for managing and organizing the integrated scripts by malware family. And each of these options are available and provide a common interface for inputs and outputs to clearly define the workflow. This enables in individual modules the ability to stay current as new capabilities become available. Now, as we discussed before, manual reverse engineering inevitably requires the use of a disassembler or decompiler for code analysis. And each of these options, Hexray Zeta, Binary Ninja, or the open source Ghidra, can be integrated into an automation framework for the execution of targeted scripts to extract information of interest. So now that we know what goes into modules, who actually develops them? Now, there are open source options available, which really provide a good starting point, but we got to keep in mind that there are limits to what they support in terms of both breadth and depth. Critical pieces that are important to you and your organization may be missing. In-house development is certainly the most expensive option, and there are also hidden costs in managing and maintaining the code. In general, this probably only makes sense for larger teams. Proprietary options can also be expensive. However, they can take the hidden cost burdens off of your team, and our experience is cheaper than the true cost of doing everything yourself. Additionally, they can provide a baseline support, like the open source libraries, that your team can immediately build off of. The decision at the end of the day really depends on your team composition, your budget, your resources, and your willingness to maintain supporting libraries and add new features. So we've seen an overview of an automation framework. So how does Cyphertech's ACE framework function to extract IOCs and embedded components? Well, first, malware is submitted to ACE and scanned using our Yara signature service for the purposes of identification. In this example, malware.exe is coming in, and we're yielding a match on Chinoxy dropper. Chinoxy being the malware family, it being a dropper component. We then take the matching rule names and we supply them to our mapping service. And that's how we're automatically triggering a YAR detection to dispatch a parser. So we're taking that Chinoxy dropper YAR rule name, and we're looking it up in a dictionary to see what module it's actually tied to. In this case, a MWCP parser named Chinoxy, DC3 MWCP being one of those frameworks that we discussed earlier, which is embedded as a part of ACE. Now, parsers are built for each malware family and can consist of multiple components like we talked about. So in this example, we see that there are a couple of different dropper versions for Chinoxy, a couple of different implant versions, and a couple of different configurations based on size. And this really helps us enable recursion and adaptability to changes in the malware over time. From there, we kind of run down the list of the parsers which are available, and we call the identify function of each parser. And what the identify function is aiming to do is validate that it can parse a file as expected. So in this example, we're aiming to extract encrypted configuration data. So before we actually run the parser, we're validating we can detect a known method to do that. Specifically, we're validating that an XOR algorithm can be detected, that we can find a configuration decryption key, and that we can find the resource which contains the configuration data. Once we've validated that we can parse the file using this parser, we then proceed to extract, decrypt, and report on the configuration data. In this example, like we described before, we're specifically locating the target resource, we're obtaining the decryption parameters for it, and then we're decrypting and dispatching that data back into the Chinoxy pipeline to be identified by one of those configuration modules in order to report the information. In addition, this parser specifically is going to try and extract embedded components. We identified that it's a dropper. It probably contains something else. In order to do that, we're going to run an integrated IDA Python script using the Cordesi framework, and that'll help us obtain path information and resource information that we couldn't easily identify through static code methods alone. Once we return back from the Cordesi IDA script, we're going to locate the target resource, which contains the embedded component, and then we're going to decrypt and decompress that component, and again dispatch it back to that pipeline in order to extract any additional information which it might contain. Once we've run through the parser and parsers for that embedded recursion, the configuration data is then presented to the end user, which include all the IOCs necessary for network defense. This includes C2 addresses, like we see at the top, or those required for strategic questions. So think keys and the passwords that are used, and the extracted components, which you could see at the bottom. That configuration data was identified, dispatched and then identified as being a specific byte size, and we were able to track the information from it. We also identified and parsed the additional Chinoxy implant, specifically a Chinoxy XOR variant. So at this point, we will demo ACE itself. So I'll jump out of the slide deck and into our web browser. We have ACE available through the web or through an on-site. Here we're at our homepage, and we'll jump to supported families, which really just provide information about what are the malware families that we support, what are the components within those malware families that we support, the YARA signatures, which tie the targeted capability to that malware, and the configuration parsers, the individual modules which make up that capability. Now, instead of uploading a file raw, I'll just jump into my history in order to show you guys information from something that's been previously parsed. So what we'll take a look at is this first option. We can see that YARA signatures hit on this, identifying the sample as a Sidewinder implant, and specifically tied to the MWCP ACE Sidewinder capability. So if we jump into that, first thing I'll draw your general attention to are these debug statements, which we really provided in order to enable a feedback loop, both for the reverse engineer developing the capability and anyone in trying to interpret the results. Trying to identify what is running on this file and what the expected results are. That way, if anything is missing, you can compare and try to understand why something was missing and maybe identify that we need to update this. So in this case, maybe we won't see a CT URL because it wasn't actually set in the configuration data, providing that kind of context for the results that we're seeing. From there, MWCP uses the concept of what they call standard metadata and other metadata, which I found I kind of like. Standard metadata being fields which are common to all malware families, so things like C2 URLs or addresses, things like directories or file names or file paths, and the concept of other metadata, which really describes things that are specific to an individual malware family, which wouldn't necessarily make sense to all malware families. We can see some options there. So that's just a brief look at what ACE is. At this point, we'll take any questions. Rob?
Yeah, the only question that we got was, will this be recorded and available later? The answer is yes. If there's any other questions, feel free to ask them. All right, I guess there's no questions.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it.
I know I do see questions coming in. Just did they show up for you, Rob?
Oh yeah. Is this strictly browser based? No. So I suppose you mean ACE itself. It's not strictly browser based. The way we organize it is we have different tiers of options available. In one option, you can just simply use the browser in order to submit files and receive results. But we also provide the option to purchase all the source code itself. That way you can immediately start building on the modules for your team. Wade is asking, is all the analysis just static? Yes, we're not using any debuggers or any sandboxes. All of this is purely from a static perspective, typically based on maybe regex patterns to identify code of interest, or jumping into a disassembler in order to extract information, or using the obfuscators maybe for like JavaScript or PowerShell, things like that. What would be the best way to get started in learning malware analysis? Specific training courses recommended? So I personally got started using practical malware analysis, running through that guidebook. I don't know, Rob, do you have any specific recommendations? You're muted if you're talking.
In terms of training material, no. I was kind of self-taught, so I kind of just compiled code myself and then tried to reverse engineer it to figure out how it worked. But in terms of books, yeah, just the malware analysis book that Dan referenced.
There's a question, is there an API available for ACE? Yes, I can just show that briefly. Every user has access to an API. You get your own API key. I probably shouldn't show that piece. And in order to submit files or query previous results or anything like that. Is it possible these YAR rules will also give false positive results? Certainly. So, whether you're getting open source rules or you're getting proprietary rules, there's always the possibility that you're gonna get false positives, which is why it's really important for you as an organization to test it against a corpus of malware samples, either maybe through VirusTotal or ones that you've collected over the course of time, and also known good files. I mean, even I don't know if you guys are familiar with the FireEye SolarWinds conundrum that's going on right now, but FireEye released a rule for a in-memory dropper, and I've observed some false positives with that in VirusTotal. So there's always the chance of that, but consider signatures a first pass and not a be-all, end-all. It's up to the parsers to really have that more granular detection rate. Answered that. Is there some training at SANS as well? I personally haven't taken any SANS training, but I know that they have a number of different malware courses. I know people have taken that and had positive reactions. But there's also, I've also seen a lot of different malware courses going at conferences that travel around. I know there was a malware course at Recon. There's one at DEFCON every year, or is that maybe the one the week before? Yeah, anything else? What languages are supported for scripting? So everything that we do is typically in Python, and most of this talk was revolved around Python. Well, Python language resources, but I know some orgs have chosen to move toward Golang. The reason that I like Python is because it's so malleable and things are easy to change over time. You don't have to worry about recompiling items. So that's been something that I've liked about it. But at the end of the day, I'm sure, I think there probably are frameworks available in other languages. I just haven't seen them or I haven't looked for them. So that's just something to keep in mind. No, I do not have the dashed cryptocurrency. Right. One last question. To build our own automation, do we need full scripting knowledge? You're going to need some level of understanding. I mean, to be fair, when I first started doing this, I barely understood Python. It's something that you get used to over the course of time, and will make your ability to reverse engineer and yield results a lot better over the course of time. So just kind of got to plug away. But yeah, to build your own automation at some level, you're gonna need scripting knowledge. Because you don't necessarily want to rely only on an engineering team to build that automation, because there's a lot of domain specific knowledge which goes into it. All right, Allie, I'll hand it off to you.
All right, so thank you so much, everybody. We're going to give you a little bit of time back in your day, but before we leave, I want to introduce you to Stacy and Kathy, who work with recruiting at CipherTech. They're always looking for great candidates, and wanted to quickly say hello. They're going to just do a quick 1-minute intro, and then I'll officially close this out.
My name is Kathy McMillian. Thank you for joining us today. I'm the Director of Technical Recruiting. I've been here since 2015, and I absolutely have fallen in love with the mission work that CipherTech supports. If you are in the market or interested in your potential fit with us, definitely reach out to me or my colleague, Stacy Connell, and we will absolutely schedule some time to speak to you. And I'll keep it short, and I'll pass you on to Stacy right now.
Hi, I'm Stacy Connell. I've been with CipherTech since 2017, and I certainly wouldn't have known anything about malware before then. So it's been an interesting career from my perspective. And we're excited to meet anyone who is watching today, who is interested in a career with us. Allie's going to present or give you our email address. Please do reach out to us if you have any questions or if you have any interest in learning more about what career opportunities we might have. Thank you.
Great, thank you guys. So we hope you learned something today and found this useful. If you have any additional questions about ACE, you can contact CipherTech directly at ACE, that's ACCE, at ciphertechsolutions.com. Or if you want to speak to Kathy and or Stacy about job opportunities, you can email recruiting@ciphertechsolutions.com. And we'll send out an email with all of that information tomorrow as well, along with the link to the recording. You also have probably 1 more minute to download that information from the provided handouts in the control panel if you want any specific handouts. And lastly, please check out more of our upcoming webinars at osdfcon.org/webinars. We have another cyber triage demo coming up on December 21st, and our next OSDFcon series will be on January 6th with DeSales, where Joe Walsh will talk about the research being conducted by digital forensics students and the impact it's having on the digital forensics community. And more will be announced soon. So as mentioned a few times already, there is a super quick survey that should just take you a couple minutes to fill out. So please do that. You're feedback is really important to us and allows us to continue to improve our webinars. So stay healthy out there, everybody, and we hope to see you again on the next one. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.